Cable step-ups, guys. So this is the topic of today's YouTube video. This was one of the most popular videos that I've ever done. It was when cable step-ups were starting to become really popular. So I wanted to redo the cable step-ups video, giving you a little bit more insights, tips, tricks on setup, execution, and how to get the most of them. So come follow along if you want to get the most out of your cable step-ups and maximally build your glutes. All right, cable step-ups. Let's jump straight in. Now, I'm going to show you quickly the setup and just a few tips on this. Now, with your bench or your step, you want to be using a height that's comfortable for you. If it's too high, you're going to find yourself bouncing off the floor. Yeah, sure, you could argue you're going to get a little bit more glutes in there because it's like a high step. But if you can't handle that high step, then just don't use it. So whatever height, step or bench works well for you. I've just got a bench here, and I do find for most people, the height of a standard bench does work pretty well. The only downside to a bench, obviously, it's soft, so you might just not feel as stable, as balanced when you're doing these, but I've got the solution for that, and I will share that in just a second. Second is your cable setup. Now, here I've got my cable set to the lowest point in this system. Your system might vary from this one, but it's the lowest point. Now, my little trick, which tends to work in most cable systems, is to put on your stirrup handle, and then your stirrup handle will come out around about the same distance, so it doesn't quite touch the bench. It's maybe like ½ an inch off the bench, and that's it. And you will tend to find that by the time you stand up, that's roughly the distance that you want that cable from yourself, all right? So obviously, if you're a little bit shorter or you've got shorter arms, then you might want that cable a different length to someone that's completely differently proportioned, but that's up to you. But that's a good starting point for most, is just to have that relatively close to that. So by the time you stand up, you're not kind of starting from a point where you've got no tension whatsoever, or the other side of things. So from there, now, my little trick with these cable step-ups and how I tend to teach them and how I suggest most perform them is actually with support from the cable stack itself. So instead of doing these like free weighted here, then actually I want you to be grabbing onto something. So grabbing onto the column right in front of you. So by doing that, we increase stability. We're not using that to help us to pull up or anything like that. We're literally using it for stability. So it's a light grab, a light hold of that. I also like to have the load on the same side arm as my forward working leg. I just find for most people, it's more comfortable. So it's your opposite arm or hand grabbing the cable, and then the other one actually grabbing, or grabbing the load. Okay, so from there, so I'm starting here, I'm leaning forward. You should find you've got just enough space to be able to grab hold of that cable. Obviously, you can move the bench forwards or backwards, but we've kind of found our right starting point by this point. It's only going to be like an inch or two off from that. So I'm leaning in, a little bit of upper back round is absolutely fine, but I'm really trying to maximize flexion through my hips, okay? So from there, I'm pressing through my front heel, that's my working leg, all the way to that top point, and then there, I'm still bending over, and then when I come down to the floor, I'm getting a soft touch of my toe. So I'm there to there. Now, there's a few things I've changed my opinion on with these a little bit, the more and more I've used them. With most step-ups, I originally suggested, and I do with other variations, I suggest that you try and land with your heel first. So I've shared tips before where we place a plate on the floor, so just your heel touches the plate and not your toes. Or even if I was actually coaching you in person, I might place my hand on the floor and tell you not to touch your toes down on my hand. So there's various ways I've tried to kind of assist people in the past to try to make sure they're not bouncing off the floor. So check this out. So the difference is, before, I would try to coach it where we're having heel landing first. So imagine we're doing our step up on that side. My heel would be touching the floor first, and I'm not bouncing off the floor. Instead, with just the cable variation that we're showing today, I've come around to the idea that actually most people prefer the feel of just a light touch of your toes on the floor. And actually by doing so, I'm not really seeing people bounce with that anyway. So don't get me wrong, we're not bouncing that foot off the floor, but instead we are light touching that toe on the floor, okay? So it's a light touch and go. So we're never really releasing load through the floor. So that's my other big tip, is just a really soft touch of that toe on the floor. It means we're controlling the range of motion each time as well, because we're standardizing that depth of each rep, and we're also not using that leg to cheat ourselves to lift all the way up. And the cable load is providing as maximum load as we possibly can through our glutes in particular. Obviously with this, you're working your quads as well, and some of you might feel your quads give out first, but there are certain ways within programming that we can kind of counteract that a little bit. We might add a little bit more glutes volume to counteract that. We might maybe pre-fatigue certain areas to make sure that you're working the areas that you want. So let's quickly go through full technique of these. So just quick recap. So I'm grabbing that weight, I'm stepping my foot on, I'm leaning forwards, I'm in that hinge position, I've got some nice support through my hand, holding onto the cables, I'm lightly touching that toe on the floor, I'm driving through that front heel, I'm up to that top point, I'm getting as much depth as I can, and again, light touch of that toe on the floor. So just notice as well the tempo that I'm using here, nice and controlled. It's no kind of here where you're not getting anything out of it. You've got to remember, at the end of the day, guys, an exercise is just a tool to create the effect we want. It's not about completing the reps. Just because it says 10 reps, it doesn't mean you have to be doing like 10 reps. If you can only do 8 with the load that you've got, and you've got a lot more tension during that set doing those 8, do that 8, okay? You don't need to be always trying to strive for more reps if those reps are a little bit more momentous, or if they're not kind of high tension reps. So it's quality over quantity as always. Hopefully you've enjoyed this video. It's on one exercise, so hopefully you haven't got too bored from it. If you're using cable step ups, you're going to highly benefit from a few of these tips I've just given you. Have a play about with them, and feel free just to drop in the comments if you do have any additional tips or ways you like to do these. Remember, if you like my YouTube, give it a like. If you want to never miss a video again, make sure you subscribe to the page as well, and I will see you next time.